Jake lived far from cities in a quiet forest where trees whispered stories of old winds, and the nights carried the voice of silence. His only companion was Max, a loyal dog who had walked with him through storms, through days of hunger, through long cold winters and blazing summers. Jake preferred peace, and the forest gave him all of it until that one night when everything changed. The rain had come heavy that evening, thundering above the roof of his wooden cabin while Max curled near the fireplace and Jake sipped from a warm mug of tea. The sky cracked with light again and again, as if something far beyond Earth was trying to send a message. Then suddenly Max stood up, his ears perked forward, his body stiff like he had heard something not meant for human ears. Jake set his mug down slowly and looked at the dog, whose growl was low and uncertain, not of anger, but of deep confusion. Without waiting, Max rushed to the door and barked once before pushing through the half-open door into the rain. Jake followed, grabbing his coat and flashlight. The night outside was soaked and wild, but Max ran forward without hesitation, his nose guiding him through the trees, while Jake kept close behind. The beam of the flashlight danced across bark and leaves and puddles that reflected lightning. Then, the light caught something strange, something not belonging in the forest, something made of metal, twisted and burned. A small ship had crashed between the trees, its surface glowing with faint blue lines like veins of light. Smoke rose from its body, but there were no flames, no sounds except the hum of energy that came in short, fading pulses. Jake approached carefully, Max already sniffing near the side of the ship where a door hung open, barely wide enough for him to peek through. Inside he saw shadows, movement, something or someone alive. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with something harder to name, a pull, a strange sense of duty. He moved closer, stepped inside, and saw her. An alien girl lay slumped against the wall of the ship, her skin pale with a slight shimmer, her eyes half open and unfocused. Her breathing was shallow, like a whisper, like a candle fighting the wind. She looked up for just a second, her eyes locking with his, and in that moment, something passed between them, not words, not images, but a raw feeling, a plea. Jake didn't speak, he simply moved to her side, lifted her gently, and carried her out into the storm. Max circled them once, and then led the way home. The forest no longer felt silent, no longer felt still. Jake didn't know what she was, didn't know where she came from, or why she had fallen here. But he knew she was dying, and he knew that leaving her behind was not something he could do. Back in the cabin, he laid her down on the old cot near the fire, wrapped her in blankets, and watched as Max sat beside her like a guardian who had always known this would come. The rain poured outside harder than before, but the storm inside had just begun. The cabin smelled of old wood, fire smoke, and damp earth, while the rain continued to drum on the roof, without pause, as if the sky refused to forget what had happened in the forest. Inside, the flickering light from the fireplace touched the walls with dancing warmth, while Jake sat near the cot watching over the alien girl, who had not moved much since he brought her in. Max lay at her feet, alert and calm, like he was guarding a secret too big for any human mind to hold. She opened her eyes again, just briefly, and Jake saw in them not fear, not confusion, but something gentle, something ancient and tired, and full of a strange hope he could not explain. He spoke to her in soft words, telling her she was safe now, telling her she would be all right, even though he had no idea if she could even understand the language that flowed from his mouth. The hours passed slowly, and the storm outside became dull hum as morning crept over the world unseen through thick clouds. Jake boiled water, crushed herbs, made a broth the way he used to when Max got sick in the winter, when the snow made the land quiet and white. He touched her forehead gently, found it cold and damp, so he placed a warm cloth there and wrapped her better in blankets, hoping it would help. She moved a little more now, her fingers twitching, her eyes fluttering open for longer moments, and then she did something that startled Jake more than the crash or the ship or the fact that she was not human. She raised one hand weakly pointed to her chest, then to him, then to Max, and gave the smallest nod like she understood, like she was thanking them with all the strength she had left, pulled a pencil and an old notebook from a drawer, and began drawing simple shapes, a tree, a moon, a human, a dog, and then pointed to each one. She watched with heavy eyes, and then with great effort reached for the pencil, and drew something of her own, something like a star, a spiral, and a large, sharp shape chasing a small one. Her hand trembled, but her message was clear even if her lines were simple. She was not here to hurt anyone. She was running from something, and whatever it was might still be out there searching for her. Jake looked at the drawing, his jaw clenched as he stared at the shape behind her symbol for herself. It looked fast and merciless and cruel, and it had followed her here from somewhere far beyond Earth. As the day passed, she grew a little stronger. Managed to drink a bit of water, though she winced each time like her body was filled with pain too deep for medicine. She tried to stand once, but Jake gently helped her lie back down, and she gave up without protest, her eyes watching Max, who had not left her side. The connection between them was strange and natural, like they understood each other without sound or word, and Jake wondered if it was instinct or something more, something older, that linked living beings in ways science could not explain. That night the storm began to fade, and the skies quieted, but Jake could not sleep. He sat by the window staring into the woods while the alien girl slept fitfully, and Max watched both of them as if waiting for a signal. No one else could hear. Jake thought about the drawing, about the star, about the thing chasing her, and about the glow that still pulsed from the wreck hidden among the trees. He felt something inside him shift, not fear, not anger, but a sense of responsibility he had never felt before, not even during his hardest years. She was here now, not by choice, and she was hurt and hunted and alone in a world that was not hers. Whatever had happened out there among the stars had followed her down into his quiet life, and now nothing would be the same again. The night stretched on, slow and long and full of thoughts he could not silence, while outside in the darkness, something far away moved closer, unseen but not unnoticed by the trees and the wind, and by Max, who suddenly lifted his head and stared into the black as if he already knew that danger was coming closer with every breath. The next morning arrived without sunshine, and the clouds hung low above the trees, like a heavy blanket that refused to lift, while the forest stood still as if it was waiting for something that had not yet touched the ground. Jake stood outside near the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the treetops, his thoughts restless and deep, while Max stayed close, his steps careful, his nose in the air. Back inside the cabin, the alien girl rested, her body weak, but her eyes now alert, following the movements around her with quiet awareness, as if she knew that her time hidden was running out. Jake had tried the radio again, that old machine with rusted knobs and wires frayed from age, but now strange noises came through, the static sounds, like whispers mixed with metallic screeches, like something not human was reaching across the airwaves. To listen or to call, Jake adjusted the antenna, climbed to the roof, and pointed it toward the hills, but the signal only grew stranger, like layers of sound overlapping, until it became clear that these weren't natural interruptions. This was a pattern, a pulse, an echo from above. When he returned to the cabin, he saw the girl had taken the notebook again and drawn a symbol he hadn't seen before. It looked like an eye with lines spreading outward, and beside it she had drawn the same sharp shape again, the one that chased her, and beside that a tiny version of Earth, and then a circle around it. Jake understood more than she said, the message clear. The hunter had found her again, and it was now watching this world. She tried to stand again, leaning on the edge of the table, her breath shaky, her hands gripping tight, while Max moved to her side. And Jake reached quickly to help, but she shook her head, pointed to the door, and then to the sky. She was warning him, or maybe trying to say that staying here would soon be dangerous, not just for her, but for him and Max too. Jake stepped back, stared at her, then looked outside at the woods that had always felt safe and peaceful, and now held the weight of something foreign, something deadly that had crossed galaxies to find one wounded girl. He remembered the traps he had built long ago to keep out wolves and wild animals when winters got hard. He remembered how to hide paths, how to create false trails, and how to disappear in places even maps forgot. Jake gathered supplies, packed food, wrapped tools, placed old batteries into lanterns, and then paused because he knew if he left now, there would be no home to come back to, not after what was coming. He turned to her and said softly, they would not run, they would stand and protect what was theirs. Even if she could not understand every word, she nodded, her face still pale, but her eyes full of something strong. That night the stars were hidden behind thick clouds, and the wind moved without direction, carrying leaves in chaotic spirals, while Max paced near the door, his ears twitching at every sound. Jake lit the lantern, placed it near the window, turned off every other light, and watched the forest in silence, waiting not for a person but for a machine built to find and destroy. Near midnight a sound rose from above, not a roar, not a scream, but a hum that seemed to vibrate in the bones, a sound too smooth to be made by nature and too cold to be from Earth. Jake stepped outside, saw a faint light moving above the trees, a shape barely visible through the clouds, and then gone again. Max growled deep and low while the girl reached for the table, pressing something in her pocket, a small device that lit up with blue circles one by one. Jake moved quickly into action, not with panic but purpose, setting traps outside using wires, metal, sharp edges collected from old tools, even broken glass, anything that could slow the hunter down. The air grew heavier with each minute, and the forest began to feel less like Earth and more like the edge of something far darker. Then, without warning, the silence broke. A beam of white light struck the ground near the edge of the clearing, burning a path through the grass as something descended with precision and speed. The hunter drone landed, soundless, sleek black metal with no face, no eyes, only sensors and weapons, and a hunger for command. Jake ducked behind a tree, watched it scan the area, its surface shifting colors blending with the shadows, while Max barked furiously, trying to draw its focus. The alien girl stood behind the cabin wall, watching the hunter that had followed her across space, now setting foot on a world that had never seen its kind. The battle had not yet begun, but the war had reached them, and nothing could be the same again. Not for her, not for Jake, not for Max, and not for the quiet Earth beneath their feet. The forest held its breath as the hunter drone moved slowly across the clearing, its sensors scanning each branch, each ripple of wind, and each trace of heat that drifted through the air like ghosts of movement. Jake crouched behind the fallen tree just beyond the edge of the cabin, his breath quiet, his hands steady as he held the old hunting rifle that had never seen a target like this. The metal monster stood tall, without a face, without a voice, without even the sound of breathing, and yet it carried with it a presence that crushed the air around it. Max growled softly beside him, ready to move, eyes locked on the hunter as if he knew where it would strike before it even did. Inside the cabin, the alien girl stood against the wall, her fingers trembling around the small device she had hidden in her clothes, a thin piece of alien tech that hummed with weak blue pulses, the last gift from a dying world, a tool of protection, or maybe sacrifice. Jake gave a signal to Max, a quick glance and a nod, and the dog bolted from cover, barking loud, fast, strong, pulling the attention of the hunter away from the cabin and deep into the trees. The drone turned smoothly without a sound and fired a beam of red light that scorched the ground where Max had been only a moment ago. But the dog was quick, weaving between trees, drawing the hunter toward the traps Jake had placed hours before. Jake moved fast behind it, firing the rifle once, not to destroy, but to distract, and the bullet bounced off the hunter's side like a pebble against steel, but the echo rang through the forest loud enough to give Max more space. The drone twisted around and moved toward Jake with speed too fast for anything of Earth. But Jake had already dropped into the underbrush, rolling through mud and leaves while sharp wires hidden in the grass caught one of the hunter's limbs, sparks flying as its balance shifted. It paused just long enough for Jake to reach the cabin door and pull the girl down into the shelter. He had dug beneath the floor an old cellar once used for storing food, now holding the last hope of a stranger from the stars. The hunter recovered, quickly broke through the first trap, and scanned again, this time slower, as if learning and adapting, and its surface rippled like liquid metal, pulling data from the air. It moved toward the cabin, the wind howling behind it, as if the whole world knew what was coming. Inside the cellar, the girl pressed the device to her chest, her lips moving silently as if reciting something from memory, and then the device glowed brighter for the first time since her crash. Jake watched her, unsure whether to stop her or trust her, but in her eyes was no fear, only calm determination. The kind he had seen once in the eyes of a soldier who knew his last step would matter more than all the rest above. Then the drone stepped into the cabin, its sensors finding heat below the floor, and it charged its weapon, preparing to burn through wood and earth to complete its mission. But before it could strike, a pulse erupted from the cellar, a silent, invisible wave of blue energy that rolled out like a tide through the walls, through the trees, and into the sky. The drone froze mid-step, its body shaking as the wave passed through its core systems, frying signals, disrupting code until its frame sparked and twisted and collapsed like a puppet with no strings. The forest fell quiet again as smoke rose from its shell, and the weapon it held flickered once, then died forever. Jake emerged from the cellar, slowly helping the girl to her feet, her face pale and weak, but her eyes still glowing with that soft light of survival. Max limped out from the trees, covered in dirt, but alive, an unbroken tail wagging weakly as he ran toward them. Jake knelt beside him, held his face in his hands, whispering words only Max could understand, while the girl stood nearby, watching them with a look of gratitude too deep for words. She walked to the broken drone, touched its side as if to confirm it was truly gone, then looked up at the stars that hid behind clouds, knowing the hunter was defeated, not by power, not by numbers, but by kindness, by courage, and by the strange, unstoppable will of a human and his dog who chose to fight for someone they had never known. The cabin stood in ruin, the earth was scarred, the silence was heavy, but something beautiful had survived, something that would be remembered, not in books, not in broadcasts, but in the soul of the one who had come from far beyond the stars and found hope in the most unexpected place on earth. The smoke from the ruined hunter slowly faded into the sky, while the wind moved gently through the forest, as if nature itself was beginning to breathe again. The night had passed, and morning light now touched the broken ground with golden warmth. Jake stood quietly near the wreckage of the cabin, its roof half gone, the walls blackened, but still holding the memories of every moment that had happened within. Max lay beside the fallen tree, licking the wound on his leg, but his eyes were bright and calm and full of pride. The alien girl sat near the fireplace, where nothing but cold ashes remained, her body still weak but healing faster than before, her breath steady and her eyes full of something far beyond gratitude, something sacred and quiet. And old Jake handed her a bowl of warm broth made from the last bit of food he had saved, and though she barely drank, she nodded once in thanks and held the bowl with care, as if it were more than food, as if it was a gift. She looked around the cabin, at the tools, at the old map on the wall, at the quiet strength of the place, and then back at him, her lips parting, slowly forming the first words in his language, soft and broken, but clear enough to shake the silence. She said, "Thank you," her voice thin like wind through tall grass, but full of meaning that words alone could never carry. Jake didn't reply, he simply smiled, nodded, and looked away, because something inside him stirred, something that didn't need to be spoken. Days passed like this, calm and slow, the forest returning to life, animals coming out from the deep woods, rivers flowing clearer than before, and birds singing again. The alien girl, whose name Jake had never learned, but whose presence had changed everything, began to walk on her own. Her wounds nearly healed, her body stronger, her steps light and graceful. She spent hours near the ship wreckage gathering parts, repairing a small device hidden in the core, and every evening she sat with Jake and Max near the fire drawing symbols in the dirt that told stories without sound, tales of stars and cities made of glass and suns that never said of people who lived on ships the size of mountains and of war that had taken all that away then. One morning, as dew still clung to the leaves and mist rolled low through the trees, a new sound filled the air, a deep low hum, not from the earth but from the sky. Jake looked up and saw a silver shape descending slowly above the forest, not sleek like the hunter, but round, soft, glowing gently like a flower opening in the air. The girl stood and pressed a signal into the device, and the ship responded, shifting its color to match the sky before landing silently in the clearing where the trees bent slightly as if bowing. From the ship came no soldiers, no weapons, only one tall figure with open hands and calm eyes, who stepped forward with care and waited. The girl walked to Jake, touched his arm lightly, and looked at him with a quiet sadness mixed with joy. She turned to Max, gave him a small smile, and reached into her satchel, pulling out a smooth stone that shimmered with blue light, and handed it to Jake. It was warm to the touch and pulsed gently like a heartbeat, and though Jake didn't understand its purpose, he knew it was not a weapon, but a key, or maybe a promise. She spoke again, softer this time, saying goodbye in her own tongue, and then in his, thank you for the life, for the shelter, for the choice you made without needing a reason. Jake stood silent, his eyes fixed on her, not wanting to stop her, not wanting to hold her back, but knowing that something rare had just touched his world and was now returning to the stars. She stepped onto the ship, which lifted slowly, the forest glowing beneath it, leaves trembling as wind circled the clearing, and then the vessel rose high above the trees, shimmered once and vanished into the sky without a sound. The forest was quiet again, but not the same, and neither was Jake. He looked at the stone in his hand and felt something shift in the air, not near but far, as if the future had turned slightly toward a different path. A week passed, and then another, and then one night the radio crackled again, this time not with noise, not with static, but with words from far away. A voice speaking softly, offering greetings from another world, asking for peace, asking for understanding, asking if Earth would listen. Governments of Earth responded slowly with caution and care. But the day soon came when the first peaceful message from the stars was received, not in orbit, not in capital cities, but in that same forest, through the same radio in Jake's cabin. And when asked how this began, when people wanted to know what started the contact between worlds, Jake simply said it began with a girl who fell from the sky, a dog who refused to be afraid, and a choice made in silence beneath the trees. That story spread far and wide, told in books and films and memories. But Jake never chased fame, never left the forest. He stayed with Max, built a new cabin, planted new trees, and watched the stars every night with the same quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, she would return again one day, not as a stranger, not as a survivor, but as a friend. The world slowly changed, not through battles, not through orders, but through understanding that kindness, courage, and one decision made in the dark could light a fire that reached across the stars and brought something new to life, something more human than fear, something that would never be forgotten. The end.